Good morning. I send greetings from Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism, an organizing collective board and growing spiritual family whose primary work and ministry is to support, resource, and enliven the power and capacity of Black UUs all across the country and the world. And I also send greetings from my home, here in Durham, North Carolina, where I and my family are a part of a beautiful and caring community of amazing people. I am deeply grateful for these communities every day, and I'm honored to be among you here in this virtual and altogether holy space. It is a great gift we have in these platforms that we can be together across miles and across experiences. Thank you. Thank you for having me. In my discernment about being with you today, I was reminded of a person named Marva Dolores Collins. Is anyone here familiar with Miss Collins? She was an educator born in the South who made her way to Chicago, where she was a substitute teacher for 14 years. Noticing the low levels of learning that some students were experiencing in particular areas, Collins took $5,000, a very large sum of money in 1975, from her own teacher's retirement fund, and started a private school in the top floors of a brownstone in the West Garfield Park neighborhood where she lived. The school she started was called West Side Preparatory School. Now, Westside Prep was educationally and commercially successful for many years. Collins and her daughter ran the school for more than 30 years until it closed in 2008. But the school's success is not really the point of this story. Just like Jesus' healing power wasn't really the point of that story in Luke. Collins, a Black woman teacher in Chicago in the mid-1970s, built a low-cost private school specifically for the purpose of teaching low-income Black children whom Collins felt that the Chicago public school system had failed. Where others had concluded that the students at Westside Prep were unteachable, Collins was so convinced that these students could thrive that she determined to ensure their flourishing. How many people do you think told Ms. Collins that she couldn't or shouldn't attempt to open a school on her own? How many banks must have turned her away when she asked for money? How many colleagues, even family members and friends, might have discouraged her? I'm imagining plenty on all accounts, but she did it anyway. She too, in her own way, climbed up onto the roof when the crowd was too big and made her own way down. And the motivation to move on this beautiful idea, this calling on her life, was the very lie that fueled others' discouragement, the too often believed and equally misguided notion that nothing can be done, so why bother? At a moment in our nation's story when mass shootings and state-sanctioned violence are on the rise each year, and where the impact of a global pandemic on the health and well-being of our children is held in the balance as schools are beginning to reopen, we have a responsibility as humans to understand how to move beyond the scarcity thinking of nothing can be done. And we have to move there because we need each other. We need all of us to not only survive, but to thrive. And sometimes, the only way to know that we can count on one another in the ways that matters most is to show up in the most unusual, most uncomfortable, and most unwieldy ways. In an ongoing exploration on my part of what this shift really requires of us, the word that consistently shows up in my spirit is disruption. Take a moment and say that word with me. disruption. Merriam-Webster defines disruption as to break apart or rupture, or to throw into disorder, or my favorite, to interrupt the normal course of a thing. Now, it never occurred to me in life that I would ever quote Forbes magazine, but a staff writer from Forbes named Caroline Howard wrote about disruption in a business context and offered an explanation that has meaning here. She wrote, "Disruption takes a left turn by literally uprooting and changing how we think, behave, do business, learn, and go about our day-to-day. That it produces something new and more efficient and worthwhile." She says it is at once destructive and also creative. What would it mean if we interrupted the everyday course of things, even just a little more often? What would it mean for us to really show up for ourselves and one another and be in opposition to systems and people and relationships that do harm? What would it mean for us to say no more, like Miss Collins did back in 1975? It would mean rupturing, sometimes a little bit at a time, and sometimes in great waves, systems and mindsets that are harmful and that operate to ensure we don't have what we all need to simply be our whole human selves. Maybe that rupture happens when congregants of Citywell United Methodist Church in Durham and community members surround an ICE van for 3 hours in an attempt to keep their beloved Samuel from being deported after living right here in North Carolina for over 2 decades. Or maybe it's when thousands of people come together all across the country over months and years to help shift the narrative that the only way to respond and resolve issues in community is by calling the police. Or maybe it's when I remind myself on a really hard day that my worth is not tied to how much I produce, and then choose not to work, but instead to rest and do things to build my body and my spirit back up. Or maybe it's in the ordinary course of things. When you say the thing that you know will unravel everyone around you, knowing that it will not only save your heart and soul, but it will serve as a beginning to undoing what has been hurting entire communities and movements for generations. This is why allyship, in the ways many of us understand it, can sometimes fall flat, right? It is one thing to express love and care, but to do that from a distance. It's one thing to proclaim support, but to only offer it in ways that make the most sense to you. And it's another thing entirely to be right alongside one another, being willing to take what comes as if it was meant for you too, because in a country and a world that is wrought with injustice and mistreatment, if you work to disrupt that injustice, well, then it was really meant for you anyway. We have a call as Unitarian Universalists to infuse the meaningfulness, and I would argue the hopefulness, of disruption into who we are and what we do in this world as it is, if we, in fact, are committed to this world being different and better for all of us. If meaningful change locally and in this country is what we seek, breaking through to the other side of lies we've been taught, what we've been told is the only way to do a thing, and what we've grown comfortable with, is perhaps how we find it. Let me say that again. If meaningful change locally and in this country is what we seek, perhaps breaking through to the other side of lies we've been taught, what we've been told is the only way to do a thing, and what we've grown comfortable with may be how we find it. Now, I'm not going to lie and suggest that this is pretty or easy work. It's not. But we're not living it if we're not practicing it. What good does a recitation of those 7 principles bring if we have no idea how to, or have no interest in actually living them out in our day-to-day lives? And in the process of peeling back layer upon layer of conformity and complacency, we're not only going to just transform communities and systems, we are going to be made new in the process. Discover something about ourselves that moves us toward a wholeness we may have never known before. And most importantly, it's going to change how connected we are to one another, how connected we are and can be in these times. This work of disruption, it's a prayer, an intention, a critical path forward, and a deep, deep analysis about where we've been and where we need to go. It is also a recognition that in our present-day context, with the world as it is right now, disruption is devotion. Devotion to spirit, to faith, and to connection. Disruption is care. Deep and intentional care for self and community. Disruption is mindfulness. Mindfulness of everything that makes each of us whole and fully present and alive. Disruption is solidarity and comradeship. When we are in relationship long enough that I might already know what you need because I've already been there with you. And it begins with me, with you, with all of us. The only way to liberation for all people is to embody a transformational Unitarian Universalism. That is, to be willing to interrupt the usual course of things and be open to the changes that building a new way may bring to your heart, your body, your mind, and your spirit. What sacred moment will be unearthed by you? What will you uproot or call into question? What dreams will you carve out of the clay, muscle into something solid, something true? These are the questions to consider and respond to if a mature faith is what we strive for. Amen. Ashe. And blessed be.